Hello and welcome to another audio lecture in my series on debunking various theistic apologetics. Brain damage philosopher here. So in the previous video, I talked about teleological arguments, and although I would like to be able to do more research in order to shore up the arguments I made regarding science in that video, since that's sort of out of the question because of my condition, I'm overall fairly satisfied with how that video went. However, I'm not satisfied with how the video before that on morals in relation to theism went. And, well, at least I'm not satisfied with the second half of my video titled Moral Messiness, I believe. I changed the title from the original one. Specifically, I'm okay with how I handled the actual moral argument as put forward by people like Dr. Craig, but I'm not happy with how I dealt with other similar but more pragmatist and less syllogistic arguments later in the video. So I'm going to cover those arguments again in this video in hopefully what I believe will be a more concise and incisive way. So to begin with, the first argument I want to talk about is the argument that we need religion in order to have a solid foundation for our morals. Now, the problem with this argument is the direction in which it's being made. If you had other arguments for the truth of religion and independently based on evidence and such, then making an argument that morals should be based on that religion, or at least making the argument that one could use this evidential religion as a basis for morals that's as solid as any other basis might be feasible. The problem is that this sort of moral pragmatist argument that you need religion in order to provide a basis for morals isn't actually making that claim. Instead, the reason the argument is being made in the first place is to convince someone who is not convinced by the other arguments and evidences that a theist might provide, to convince them to adopt that religion because they already hold the morals and want a foundation for those morals. In essence, the argument that many people make goes like this. Premise 1. Only religion can provide a solid foundation for the objective morals that we share. Premise 2. You believe in these objective morals and therefore want a solid foundation for them. Premise 3. Therefore, you should believe in religion because it provides the solid foundation that you desire for the morals that you share. The problem with this, of course, is, first of all, it assumes that the person the theist is speaking to actually shares the same moral beliefs as the theist and the religion that the theist is proposing. If I disagree that the morals that the religion the theist is trying to propose to me are actually good and valuable and that I should follow them, then, of course, the theist's argument is not going to be convincing. If the theist, for instance, is arguing that only Christianity can provide a solid moral foundation for why slavery is right, I am not going to find that to be a compelling reason to adopt their religion. Additionally, a theist might, of course, respond to this by saying that, well, we all generally share, some basic moral beliefs, such as that murder and stealing is wrong. And so they can at least rely on those common beliefs in order to convince their interlocutor using this argument. However, this is where the second problem comes into being, which is that if they are expecting everyone to already share these common moral beliefs, then, of course, having religion in order to preserve those beliefs help people share them is obviously not necessary, because they're assuming the result that they think only religion can provide in the process of trying to show why you need religion. It's basically like talking to someone who's already up on a stool and saying, you need this stool. Here's another stool for you. It's like, I'm already on the stool. Like, if you want me on a stool, I'm already on one. You don't need to offer me another one. Of course, the religious person might quite rightly respond to this objection that the real problem is that the atheist that shares the moral beliefs that their religion also shares does not have a good foundation for having those moral beliefs, whereas the religious person does. And this is the crux of the issue. However, the whole reason that they're using this argument is because they already don't have other evidences and arguments that work independently of morals to demonstrate that their religion is true. So they're trying to appeal to the desire to have a solid foundation for this shared set of morals in order to convince the person to choose their religion. However, if the sort of arrow of supporting goes from morals to religion, which it does in this argument, because they're depending on these morals being shared and important in order to convince people to buy into the religion, and there's no external support for the religion besides this, which there isn't if they're reduced to making this argument, which appeals more to practicality and desire than to actual truth and evidence, then it's really the religion that's being supported by the morals and not the morals supported by the original religion. In essence, because they've sort of reversed the direction, it becomes more obvious that a religion for which there is no convincing evidence cannot serve as a convincing and solid foundation for anything else, let alone something that people are more likely to believe in and agree with than the religion that they're trying to have serve as a foundation. Because an argument that uses premises that are less likely than the conclusion they're trying to lead to is not a very convincing argument, right? If I'm using all of these, outlandish or unconvincing premises, then and the conclusion is inherently more convincing than the premises, then first of all, the premises aren't going to make the conclusion any more convincing, and they're obviously not going to lend very good support to the conclusion. To sum up, the problem with the argument that we need religion in order to have a solid foundation for morality, and that's why we should accept religion, is that this sort of reverses the arrow of influence, such that religion is actually depending for its convincingness on how convinced we are to share that morality, instead of relying on its own strength in order to make the morality more convincing. And since the whole point is to have a foundation for morality, that makes the whole argument totally unconvincing, because you're trying to propose something that can't stand on its own as a foundation to support something else. This is made even worse of an argument by the fact that, as I demonstrated in the last video that I talked about theistic morality, theism actually doesn't provide a philosophically interesting or rigorous or convincing foundation for morals. It can provide heaven and hell, but it can't provide any philosophical argument any more convincing than one a naturalist might propose for moral oughts or duties or anything else. So, moving on. Let's talk about the argument often made by Jordan Peterson and Ben Shapiro that our morality, the one that we all adopt today, even in secular society, is actually derived from religion, religious morality, and more specifically, Judeo-Christian morality. The problem with this argument, first of all, is the fact that whether secular morality comes from a Judeo-Christian background or not has no bearing on whether we should adopt Judeo-Christianity. You see, it's like a ladder, right? If Judeo-Christianity is the ladder that allowed us to get to this point with regard to our morals, but then we step off the ladder onto the roof, now we're at that height and we don't need the ladder anymore. So unless you can provide a reason, a convincing reason, why morality can provide a solid and convincing foundation for morality, which I just now and in my previous video on theistic morality basically debunked, then there's no real compelling reason to think that just because, historically speaking, our values developed from Judeo-Christianity, that we should need to continue with Judeo-Christianity in order to keep our values. This is especially true. Here's where it gets interesting. Because of the fact that our current values are not actually directly a result of Judeo-Christianity or Judaism. Instead, they are a result of taking the good parts from Judeo-Christian morality and using atheistic and skeptical, or at least deistic criticism of Judeo-Christian values to discard the rest, such as slavery, and only keep the very few and not very often mentioned components of Judeo-Christian values, such as treating your neighbor like yourself, that we actually think are helpful for living with other people. In essence, although there are some ways in which our morality has developed from Judeo-Christian values, it no longer depends on Judeo-Christian values in whole or really in part. It's like it's become its own thing. It may be influenced by it, but it's not a direct product of it in such a way that it requires Judeo-Christian values to be maintained. Furthermore, I actually think that the amount of our morality that is actually developed from Judeo-Christian values is vastly overstated by such right-wing people as, PragerU, Ben Shapiro, and Jordan Peterson. In that there are many moral beliefs that we hold that have nothing, that are not in Judeo-Christian values. There are many moral beliefs in Judeo-Christian values that we do not hold. And there are many beliefs in Judeo-Christian values that we do hold, but for completely different reasons than those which are presented in the foundational texts of Judeo-Christian that determine Judeo-Christian values. In essence, there is really no stronger way to demonstrate that two things are not related than to demonstrate that one has properties the other does not have. So, for instance, if I want to demonstrate that A and B are not related, the strongest way to do it is to demonstrate that A has properties B does not have, A does not have properties that B does have, and that the properties that they both share are different in important ways. I mean, that's basically a complete all the way down the line demonstration that A and B are different things. And so modern secular values are inherently different than Judeo-Christian values, and although they may be influenced by them, they have maintained what influences they have for different reasons than what those original moral values were proposed for in the Judeo-Christian foundational beliefs. So additionally, it's interesting to point out that the morals of the Judeo-Christian tradition have in fact changed over time, and they've changed because of the philosophical, not theological or Bible-based arguments that philosophers and activists such as Frederick Douglass have made concerning morality. They may, in essence, just like religion doesn't predict the reality that we see, but it's instead has been post hoc adapted to fit the reality we see, and which demonstrates that religion is not a predictive and helpful epistemological basis for beliefs about the world. Religion has not predicted the moral beliefs that we hold as true now, but has instead had to be post hoc adapted through reasoning done outside its strictures to moral beliefs that we later came to believe were correct, which demonstrates that Judeo-Christian religion is not actually a good predictive basis for beliefs about morals. Additionally, to skip back a little bit, remember I was saying that the values that secular morality holds now, that it shares with Judeo-Christian morality, are not actually held for the same reason. Not only does this demonstrate that secular morality while it may owe a historical debt to Judeo-Christian values, does not actually owe a current debt or rely on it. It also is true that these values that we hold for different reasons than Judeo-Christianity holds them, such as the belief in the moral worth of human beings, such that we should treat them like we would want to be treated, and so on. Those beliefs are actually held by many other religions, and that have other conflicting beliefs with Judeo-Christian values. And therefore, we could just as easily say that secular values owe a dependency to Jainism, which has something like the Golden Rule, or any number of other things. One example that Christians often like to bring up when talking about how secular morality has no basis, or how it depends on Judeo-Christian values, is the Ten Commandments. The problem with the Ten Commandments is that there are only really, I believe, 2 commandments in the Ten Commandments that we actually believe are moral or enforced with laws now. And those are obviously, like murder and theft, the ones that are obviously wrong and have been found to be wrong in many cultures that had no contact with Christianity, both before and after the existence of Judaism. I meant Judaism instead of Christianity, because the Ten Commandments are originally from Judaism. And in fact, many of the Ten Commandments, such as the ones that lead to a theocracy, essentially, we would view as immoral to hold up as moral strictures on all human beings, and we would find especially abhorrent if actually enforced in our laws. So, to sum up on my response to the idea that secular values actually depend on Judeo-Christian values, modern secular values have almost no relation to Judeo-Christian values, and the points along which they are similar, the similarities are held for different reasons in the 2 belief systems, such that whatever historical debt for the happenstance of its development secular values may owe to Judeo-Christian values, they owe no current philosophical debt to Judeo-Christian values, such that in order to be justified, they must rely on and accept Judeo-Christianity. Moving on, let's talk about let me just also mention that I just want to stress the point that there are many things that Christianity, the reason that Christianity aligns with secular morals so much today is because it has been post hoc adapted to fit secular morals, not because it predicted or led to directly secular morals. For instance, the reason that Christians don't accept slavery today, even though it is very clear in their Bible from Leviticus and Exodus that slavery was completely acceptable, even what we would call chattel slavery in the law, and that, as Jesus states in Matthew, he did not undo the law, so the law should still apply to modern Christians. The reason Christians ignore that is not because it's not a part of their faith, or not something that they would naturally be led to believe by their faith, but instead because they've been dragged along by advances made in secular morality. So, if anything, what we now call Judeo-Christian morality, it owes more to secular values than secular values do to Judeo-Christian values, since often Christians, in order to reason concerning why they cherry-pick their morals out of their scriptures, rely on reasoning that secular people can make as well, and in fact do make. Okay, moving on. The next argument that I want to talk about is the argument that I've really only heard Jordan Peterson make, that religion is sort of co-evolved with humanity, such that the reason that religion survives is because it makes the people that hold its tenets more likely to survive, and therefore more likely to pass it on. And so essentially, the religions that continue to exist and be powerful today, that indicates that they have some kind of wisdom that improves the lives of its believers. And furthermore, that since religion is sort of has been modified by everyone that's held it as it's passed down, and it has things encoded into it, it sort of represents the encoded wisdom of the collective unconscious of humanity. So I have two responses to this. First of all, religion, it is somewhat correct to view religion and other ideas like religion from a sort of evolutionary perspective. However, religion, like other ideas, doesn't do well, as in propagate and continue, if it necessarily makes the lives of those that adhere to it better. Only if it is more likely to keep them believing it, and more likely to make them spread it. And so, religion, there's no reason to assume that religion has developed in order to be developed as sort of a meme idea to be beneficial to those who hold it, since the real evolutionary selection pressure on it is merely to propagate and continue itself, and that doesn't necessarily have anything to do with the welfare of those who hold it. So it's better to view religion, if you want to view it from an evolutionary perspective, as something like real genes, which has developed purely to propagate itself, perhaps even at the cost and definitely with no necessary care for those who hold it. This is why it's often helpful to listen to religious doctrines and actually pick out the things that are very obviously designed to propagate the religion and keep people in mind traps that don't let them escape the religion, whether or not those things are actually beneficial to the people that hold the religion. Furthermore, on the point that it might contain collective wisdom, that is entirely possible. However, just because something is something people believed and thought was helpful for a very long time, doesn't mean it's the optimal belief that will help us the most. So, it's possible that religion has some beneficial wisdom encoded in it. However, that beneficial wisdom might be a suboptimal maxima and might also be more fitted towards the environment that the people that originally encoded the wisdom had to live in than the environment that we live in now, which is very different socially, economically, culturally, and even physically than the environment in which, the Iron Age environment in which, at least, for instance, Judaism and Christianity, Judaism originally developed. Furthermore, it's just as possible that incorrect, quote-unquote, wisdom is encoded into religion. And in fact, as in the case of the spare the rod and spoil the child idea, which promotes child abuse, we know that some things in the religious doctrine are actually harmful. And so if we want to figure out what in religion is helpful and what is harmful, and to weed out the harmful things and keep just the helpful things, that means that we'll have to apply reasoning and evidence and science and psychology and sociology to religion in order to separate the wheat from the chaff, which means that we might just be better off applying evidence and reason and psychology and sociology directly as best we can find out what is true about what helps and what harms us. In essence, going to religion for wisdom is simply either you accept it wholesale, which is a minefield because there are just as many harmful things in religion as helpful things, since again it didn't develop to be helpful, or you pick and choose from religion, in which case you have to use external evidence anyway. So why not depend on external scientific evidence and reasoning, since we have since that is actually a better epistemological basis to determine things about the world anyway than just appealing to tradition, essentially. So additionally, one issue with religion is, of course, the idea that this wisdom is specifically encoded. You see, the problem with encoding, especially when it's encoding through parable, myth, and story, is that it can be interpreted in many different ways. Thus, what interpretation you use is as much determined by what you already think is helpful and harmful than anything else, which means that you're already depending on your existing and external beliefs about what is helpful and harmful and you're not really depending on religion at all. You're just adapting religion to what you already believe. So, essentially, my response to the idea that religion holds hidden encoded wisdom is, number one, there's no reason to think that it would have evolved to do that. Number two, what wisdom it does have is known to be mixed in with actually harmful things. And so you'd have to use an external standard of evidence to choose between them anyway. So why not just rely on external evidence? And furthermore, the process of interpretation means that you're going to be getting even less from religion because you'll essentially be getting whatever you put into it out of it. Then let's also talk about the argument that's often made. This is one that many conservatives make about the social fabric. Basically, the idea that a common set of beliefs, which they believe can only be a religion, is necessary to provide a common foundation and set of values for society so that the society can be held together. This is actually, in essence, at its core, true. The best way to hold a society together is to ensure that they have a common set of values and beliefs. However, secular philosophy and morality provides no worse a foundation for doing this than religion. Since religion is fundamentally not adopted on the basis of anything more than faith and perhaps, if you find the moral argument convincing, the values that you already have and have been either brought up to hold, come to hold, or been indoctrinated into, then there is no more reason that anyone would select a single religion than that anyone would than that everyone would select a single subjective morality. Since subjective morality, in the view of religious people anyway, secular morality, since secular morality, in the religious view at least, is purely subjective based on the values you've been brought up with, the values you've been indoctrinated into, the values you've come into, or faith, right? So essentially, if I take the theistic argument that without religion all morals are subjective on face value, then secular morality is on exactly the same footing as religion. And so whatever method we could use to ensure that, so we couldn't expect a whole society to choose the same religion any more or less than we would expect the whole society to choose the same set of secular philosophies and values. And furthermore, we wouldn't expect religious people who hold different religions or are even part of different sects of the same religion to be able to settle their differences, since they have no common evidence on or reasoning on which to ground their argument. Then we would expect people who end up selecting different secular philosophies and values to be able to settle their differences. And so, in fact, religion is, even granting the theistic point that without religion, morality is completely subjective. Religion is on no better footing than secular values. However, it gets more interesting than this, because one common theistic response to this is that, of course, if we taught religion in schools, essentially made sure that everyone was indoctrinated into the same religion, then of course it would be much easier to have a common set of values, and maybe we should do that in order to ensure our society holds together. But as John Stuart Mill pointed out in his essay about utilitarianism, it is just as feasible to indoctrinate everyone into the same set of secular philosophies and secular values, which, interestingly, religious people seem to be very upset about, which is actually a lovely little bit double standard that I'd like to just make a side note about. They get all upset about how schools are indoctrinating children into secular philosophy and values, but turn around and want to do that to their own children, want everyone else to do that to their children, and would secretly be ecstatic if schools taught Christian religion to their students. Additionally, let me stop granting the theistic assumption that without religion, morality is subjective. Because here's the thing. While religion justifies values, so under a religious system, morals and values may be justified by the beliefs of the religion. Although, as I discussed in one of my earlier videos on theistic morality, I don't think that religion can provide a better justification for its values than a naturalist can. But I'll grant that theistic premise instead, because I like granting premises when I make arguments. So let's grant the theistic premise that modern theistic morality is directly and perfectly and not in any way post hoc justified by religious beliefs. Meanwhile, the problem, the reason that religion is on the same footing as secular values, granting the theistic premise that secular values are arbitrary, is that religion itself has no evidence for the religious beliefs that would justify morality. And so religion ends up being the foundation for morality, but there's no foundation for religion. Whereas for secular people, they just take out the middleman of religion, which goes into my response to the earlier argument about needing religion as a foundation for morality as well. If I can just arbitrarily assume something to justify my morals, then why can't I just arbitrarily assume a justification for my morals? But anyway, now if so granting the theistic premise that their morals are justified by their beliefs, let's say I stop granting the theistic premise that secular morals and values are totally arbitrary. Now we're in a situation where religious belief is faith-based or value-based and, in essence, arbitrary. But secular values generally tend to have their premises based in abstract rationality and evidential, evidence that we find in the natural world. In essence, in essence, everyone believes that the natural world exists, whether or not they believe something additional exists, and everyone has to use reason. So while the belief in religion is essentially arbitrary and faith-based, the belief that choosing a secular philosophy and value system, while it might be somewhat arbitrary, is at least based on evidence and reasoning that everyone can share and agree on, in theory, whether they actually do or not. And furthermore, if we stop granting theists the premise that their morals are completely justified their beliefs, right? Basically granting them an exception to the is-ought, then they're in more trouble because, their point that, but this is going back to the moral argument, but briefly, if you can't derive an is from an ought if you're a naturalist, neither can you do that if you're a supernaturalist. So even if you believe in a religion's claims, you're not really in any better of a position than someone who doesn't. So basically, my argument, my response in summary to the argument that you need religion to provide a common set of values for a society is that because belief in religion is faith-based and arbitrary, even if I grant the theistic premise that the beliefs of a religion, once accepted, provide a direct justification for values, and also I grant the theistic premise that holding secular values is a completely arbitrary and subjective decision, even still, that does not make religion any more effective in ensuring a common set of values than secular philosophy is. And if I stop granting those premises, we can see that secular philosophy is actually somewhat better, at least, at providing a common set of values, or at least some kind of decidable way to decide between different sets of values on the basis of reason and mutual benefit. So it's a little better, at least, than religion does. Because that's the other thing. Religion often denigrates the use of reason and deciding things based on, the common benefit to the parties involved. Which means that it takes away a tool that secular morality has, even if people have different values, for deciding between different beliefs that are arbitrarily selected. So I think that's it for this video. I think that this turned out a little better than the last time I tried to cover these. So yeah.